of course, we've all heard that water is life, right? In fact, before the show, I saw you were even wearing a Water is Life t-shirt. I just love that. And it's so true. There's so much truth to that. As magical as life is, that's how magical water is. As mysterious as life is, that's how mysterious water is. It's as much potential as life has. That's how much potential water has. But in some ways, it's almost more accurate to say that living water is life. And there is a very, very big distinction between living water and dead water, because water itself is a physical body, right? She's the body of life force. She's the body of consciousness. And just like our bodies, she can be healthy or sick, alive or dead. And the vast majority of water that we ever come into contact with is dead water.
Peace, everyone. Welcome to Masters of Ceremony. I'm your host, Andrew Ascari-Poor, and I'm so pleased to be back in the flow of producing and releasing these podcasts because I'm remembering again just how much I love doing this and how passionate I am about having these conversations with people I really admire and respect, and having them documented to be able to be shared with all of you. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who's been patient with me releasing and producing more of these episodes. I want to reiterate that I'm doing it all by myself and it's been quite the journey, but I feel like I've gotten into a good flow of learning how to streamline the whole process and do it in a way in which it's not exhausting to me, and that I can actually truly receive the nourishment that I aim to receive through having these conversations with people I really respect. So today's podcast is just that for me. Wow, I truly think that it may be the most important podcast I have recorded and released. And that is because I'm speaking with an incredible woman, an incredible researcher and educator on the most important topic of sacred water. So I know some people may say, water, what's so important about that? And to me, that would be almost a blasphemous thing to even express, because I have come to learn through my lived experience, through the teachings of my elders, through ceremony and ritual and prayer, that water is the most essential source of life, that is not only a resource that we use to nourish ourselves or to live, but is a substance that is so magical, so powerful, so sacred, has the potential to solve so many of the issues that we face today. That for me to have somebody like Isabel Friend come on and educate all of us with her articulate speech about the science of water, the spiritual side of it, the technological and historical side of it, I think it's just such a blessing to be able to share this information with you all. And Isabel is amazing. I know you all are going to fall in love with her. I first heard her, I believe, on the Medicine Stories podcast with Amber Magnolia Hill. And I was just so impressed at not only how passionate she was about the topic of water, but also how well researched and studied she was. And in this episode, we just spoke about so many different things. I really feel like we covered a lot of ground. And I think I just truly want everyone to tune in and listen without me priming you so much about what we spoke about, but I will share a little bit more about Isabel Friend. Isabel Friend is an extensive researcher and educator on all things regarding water, the sacred source of all life. She is a certified nutritionist, an incredible public speaker, an advisor to various global water initiatives, and simply an amazing teacher for all of those interested in learning more about the most sacred, complex, mysterious substance in the universe, water. Just a few of the things we discussed is the magical and mysterious qualities of water and how water can be used for a solution for many of the problems we face today. We also spoke about the different kinds of water, structured versus bulk, alkaline, Kangen, and a lot of the misconceptions that I think a lot of people have today with a lot of the trends and fads that we see happening with water becoming commodified and being sold as a product, et cetera, et cetera. We discussed the dangers of microplastics and other toxins that are entering all of our waters all over the planet, and how this not only affects our bodies and our physical well-being, but also our mental well-being. We went into privatized water, the greed of corporations, these water mafias and cartels that are doing so many activities that are essentially anti-water, anti-human, anti-life. And we spoke a little bit of how we as everyday people can combat some of these corporations and entities that are working very hard to make water not so accessible to all of us. And eventually we spoke about what is most important to me, and that is the indigenous teachings and the spiritual teachings of this sacred water, and how when, as Isabel says, we view water as something more than just what we've been taught it to be, when we really see it for its beautiful, necessary, magical, generous, loving, alive being, then we can really understand how we must treat this water. And for me, the indigenous and native and spiritual and more harmonious viewpoints of what this water means to us is the way in which we can really change how we treat this water, how we receive this water, and increase our gratitude for this amazing source of life. So I hope you guys enjoy this episode. Isabel is generous enough to be offering a discount to all of my listeners. You can receive all that information from her at the end of the podcast and also in the show notes. And I really appreciate you all taking time to listen to our conversation today. Hope you enjoy. Okay, Isabel Friend, welcome to Masters of Ceremony. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks so much for inviting me on. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here.
There's so many different directions we could go in regarding this topic of water, this most important topic in my eyes that I have covered yet on this podcast. And I took your 7-day e-course, Navigating the Waters, and just as Amber Magnolia Hill stated in her podcast with you, I don't think I've ever taken as many notes watching an e-course before watching YouTube videos. Really, I mean, I have so many notes and I learned so much. And as stated in the intro, you have been such a passionate, devoted protector and educator on the topic of water for the past 12 years. And before we get into the litany of aspects of how water is the element we need to address in order to save ourselves and the planet, I would love to hear a little bit about your upbringing and what eventually led you to become a water researcher and educator.
Thanks for asking. I first started studying water in 2009 when I was living in Brooklyn. And at the time, I was a nutritionist, and I was really interested in what are all of the ways that health and nutrition can help human beings to live into their optimal potential. And I really feel that human potential is infinite. I believe that there is just an infinite, vast capacity that we have within ourselves that we have not even tapped into, not even begun to scratch the surface. And at the time, I really thought, you are what you eat. And so it must be food that can help us to unlock that potential. And I gradually started to realize as I was working with clients, and people are statistically more likely to change religion than they are to change their diet. So I just started to realize that even more so than we are what we eat, it's really that we are what we drink, because we're 70% water by volume and we're 99.9% water molecules molecularly. And I started to drink spring water at that time. I started to wildcraft and forage my water. And that really just made all the difference in my mentality, my psychology, my emotions, my physiology. And that led me into the work of Victor Schauberger, who was, they call him the water wizard. And in the late 1800s, early 1900s, he was really bringing through some of the most incredible wisdom about water. I mean, what Tesla was for electricity, Schauberger was for water. Um, and that really started my rabbit hole. That's when I really started to realize, oh my gosh, water really has the answers to solve every one of humanity's toughest questions. And I know you asked about my upbringing before that saga started in 2009. And honestly, I wish I had some epic like superhero origin story for this. Like, oh yeah, I was really into water my whole life. And but actually, I think I just had kind of a pretty normal childhood. I grew up in Georgia and Virginia. I did always really, really love to swim, and I loved being by the ocean. But other than that, I wouldn't say water was any more a part of my life than any other normal kid. I think we all kind of grow up thinking that water is just as common as dust and just as simple, right? And I think there's a lot of reasons for why that's kind of humanity's default perception. But totally. It just couldn't be farther from the truth.
Wow. So knowing a bit that you just fell into, maybe it's safe to say, I hope it's not too much of an overstatement to say that you quickly became obsessed with water as you began to learn about the magic of it. I think it's very important for us and for people to simply be reminded of how important water is, because it feels like it's so obvious, but obviously if you look at the state of just our planet today, you can see that most people do not respect and do not understand the importance of this sacred force of life. So I would love to just begin with, maybe if you can share some of the very magical properties of water and how not only can it be the solution to many of the problems we face today, but also just simply how miraculous of a substance water is.
Yeah, this is a really juicy place to start. I'm glad you asked that. Of course, we've all heard that water is life, right? In fact, before the show, I saw you were even wearing a Water is Life t-shirt. I just love that. And It's so true. There's so much truth to that. As magical as life is, that's how magical water is. As mysterious as life is, that's how mysterious water is. It's as much potential as life has. That's how much potential water has. But in some ways, it's almost more accurate to say that living water is life. And there is a very, very big distinction between living water and dead water, because water itself is a physical body, right? She's the body of life force. She's the body of consciousness. And just like our bodies, she can be healthy or sick, alive or dead. And the vast majority of water that we ever come into contact with is dead water. In fact, there's indigenous traditions all over the world talk about this distinction. And I think one of the tribes that really expresses it beautifully is the Mandean tribe, which is a Gnostic sect indigenous to southern Iraq. And they say that they call it the difference between living water and black water. And they say that 8/9 of all water on the planet is black water or dead water, and only 1/9 is living water. And they call this the vessel of light. And they say that this water has access to the realms of light. And there's a lot of good reason for that we'll go into. But just to kind of set the stage first, I think it's important to recognize that when water is living, when it's alive, when it's healthy, it has electromagnetic conductivity, it has molecular coherence, It's able to sense and store and transduce and amplify and transmit energy, information, and vibrational frequencies. Just like a quartz crystal is able to do when we put it in watches and computers. It acts like a stabilizing resonator for the different frequencies, and it's able to help transduce different frequencies. For example, your LCD screen that you're looking at right now probably is a liquid crystal display, right?
Yes.
And it's able to transduce electrical frequency into visual display. And that's what water is able to do as well in terms of turning one kind of energy into another kind of energy. So that's that transduction aspect of what living water is able to do. And then when it comes to sensing all of the information around it, it's extremely sensitive. There's a researcher named Theodore Schwank who called water the Earth's sensory organ, because she's constantly very subtly attuned to electromagnetic stimuli and vibratory stimuli and auditory stimuli and visual stimuli and emotional stimuli, everything that's going on around her. She has eyes, babe. She's always, always watching. And then, of course, she can also transmit and amplify all this information, all these frequencies. So water is literally the stage upon which all of life is played. But when water loses those capacities, it becomes bulk water, which again is what most of us know of as water. You can call it dead water. In scientific laboratories, they call it bulk water. And it's largely because, we mostly only had experience with this denatured, treated, processed, stagnant water, which is why, like we talked about before, that we just kind of assume water to be simple and unremarkable. But when we're really talking about the beauty and the magic of water, there's a few recent discoveries about living water that I think will help shed some light on this for your listeners. And it's just amazing. So when water is living, the molecules form together in hexagonal bonds. The hydrogens form these electrostatic hydrogen bonds, and they form this hexagonal matrix of crystalline clusters. And every single cluster of water molecules functions as a memory cell. And each and every memory cell, each and every cluster of water molecules, we're talking super, 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 super microscopic. You can maybe see it with an electron microscope, right? Each cluster has 440,000 distinct panels on it.
Wow.
Now that's only using an atomic force microscope, which is the most powerful microscope in the world. That's the smallest measurements we're able to get. But because water is fractal in nature, if we had more powerful instruments, we would see that there are actually more than 440,000 panels. We would see that each one of those panels has smaller panels on it. So we can say it has at least this many panels, and each one of those panels is responsible for sensing, storing, amplifying, transducing, transmitting, again, information. So they're basically like this array of satellites, kind of.
Yes.
And these crystalline clusters, they're like little molecular icebergs of liquid crystal that float in bulk liquid, and they become more and more dense and more glacial as the water becomes more organized into its fourth phase. So that's when the frequencies can become more connected and more in phase with each other. Now, if you consider the way that computer memory works, for example, the two are really, really similar. So computer memory, right, you have ones and zeros, ons and offs, and it's because of this quartz crystal silicon molecules, each atom is capable of two different configurations. And because there's so many of these atoms, even just two configurations can store a lot of information, right? But if you think about the fourth phase of water, this crystalline form of water, when it's coherent like this, the oxygens have 6 different valence states or oxidation states. 6. Wow. So if you had 6 states of silicon in a computer rather than 2 states, it would be, if you did the math on that, the increase of information density is something like 1 billion times the information density compared to a computer. So water molecules are about 1 billion times, each individual molecule is about 1 billion times more intelligent than even the world's most advanced nanocomputers, right? This is why Dr. Ruston Roy said that crystalline water is the world's most malleable computer, because really, I mean, she does store the codes and the patterns and the information for all of life throughout the entire universe. And when she absorbs these frequencies, this stimulation from her environment, say light, for example, say she's next to a light source, sunlight or starlight or moonlight. So it will then activate these 6 different valence states, basically activates oxygen's outer electrons into higher energy levels. And then within a picosecond, which is like, I don't know, like a zillionth of a second, I don't know, millionth or something, a teeny tiny fraction of an instant, it will return that charge to ground level again. So the super instantaneous process emits all of these photons, which is basically light energy. It's a photon is a boson, and a boson is the closest particle to the quantum field, to the source energy, right? And it will emit a photon. It will emit these photons with a frequency of about 1 quadrillion hertz. I'm not making that up. Literally, it emits it at a quadrillion hertz. I mean, this is absolutely epic on a quantum scale. Like, think about the highest frequency thing that a Rife machine has ever tested before. It's like, I think the highest frequency thing is around like 500 hertz, I think. 500 compared to 1 quadrillion. So we're talking about water being a source of free energy here.
Yes.
We're talking about each molecule of water having more energy stored within it than the current strongest nuclear power reactors on the planet. This is the magic of water. This is just one glimpse. I mean, this is just one fraction of the facet of the meniscus of water that, it goes so deep. It's so mysterious and so magical, and it's capable of so much.
Wow.
It's liquid light.
Yes, it certainly is. And I feel like from all of the research that has ever been done on water, and from everything you just shared, it's pretty obvious that we're only scratching the surface. And there's so much more necessary application of this potential of this amazing source of life. I'm curious to you, and maybe you can speak on some of the work of your favorite researchers. What are the technological and ecological ramifications of harnessing this power of water?
Oh, there's so many. There's really so many. Well, for one thing, as we just spoke about, free energy could be accessible to all people. I think it's also important to recognize, because water itself is not accessible to all people right now, because we have some misconceptions about water, and we treat water from the basis of those misconceptions, which really denatures her and leads her to kind of dry up and disappear. However, if we start treating water as a conscious, sentient, living entity that she is, then we recognize that water also has the capacity to reproduce herself, just like any living entity does. And this goes starkly against what you would learn in any hydrology school. But this is what, Schauberger discovered, and other people have corroborated, is that water is capable of reproducing. So when you are able to work with that principle, then we could turn deserts into lush food forests. There would be no more starvation. We would be able to grow prolific crops anywhere. And everyone could have access to a source of free energy, which would utterly and radically destabilize our entire capitalistic paradigm. You just cannot have a capitalistic model where everyone has access to infinite resources and abundance.
True.
Right?
Very true.
And also other aspects of the application for agriculture as well. When you treat plants with water that is structured, the plants end up having 600% higher photon radiation, which again is the light energy that it emits. So basically the energy of the fruit, the aura of the fruit, it can be measured using Cartels photography, for example. So there's just a lot more life force vitality to food that's grown with structured water. There's also some really incredible studies coming out of Israel in particular, and all throughout Europe as well. Actually, especially in Russia, they've been using magnetized water for years. They call it wonder water. But the most in-depth studies I'm familiar with using magnetized water on farm animals are out of Israel. And the animals are just so much healthier. I forget the exact statistics at the moment, but they end up producing so much more milk, so much more eggs.
Beautiful.
They don't have to use, a fraction. They don't have to use the antibiotics. They don't have to use all of these just awful RGBH. Actually, the cows who were fed magnetized water had a higher output of milk than the cows that were treated with RGBH.
Wow.
And we know that that's a hormone that they're giving to these cows that has massive ramifications for the endocrine systems of people who drink that milk.
Yes.
So when it comes to agriculture, huge ramifications, of course. And when we're talking about health and wellness, not only do we become so much healthier when we eat plants and animals that are grown with this kind of water, but when we drink this kind of water, our health just skyrockets. It's through the roof. It's incredible. There are so many applications of water in medicine. Of course, we're all familiar with homeopathy as one version of that, where they treat structured water with specific remedies or specific vibrational frequencies, and then the water is able to carry those frequencies. Well, there are a couple of researchers, David Gann and his last name is Yin. I forget his first name, but these two researchers, they actually were not trying to study homeopathy at all. One of them was a physicist. I almost called him a physician. He could be now, but he was a physicist. And then the other one was an engineer. And they just happened to stumble across what they call double helix water. Which is a way of magnifying preparations by having just one tiny little atom of something in a preparation of water. So if there's only one teeny tiny little atom of a substance in the water, and then you split that atom apart so that it's not even a full atom of that substance anymore, then you can say that there's nothing of the substance left. And yet, because they do it in a very specific way, and this researcher, Yin, was able to perfect the mathematical formulations and calculations for exactly how to make the strongest double helix remedies. The effects that this is having on people's health is incredible. And it's basically, they ended up stumbling upon the principle upon which homeopathy actually operates, but far, they perfected it. It's far more effective. And I think one of the reasons why homeopathy hasn't been widely adopted is because sometimes it can be extremely effective when it's done really well, but there are just so many factors that you can't really control for when you're making a homeopathic preparation, because it's so sensitive to everything in its environment. And they were using the most advanced labs in the country, in the US. And so they were able to control for every single little detail, and the water that the homeopathic remedies that they made were just shocking. So I think that once homeopathy takes this next step in evolution, it's going to become an even more viable option in the field of medicine. And even so, even at the level it's at now, we don't necessarily recognize it in the States as being a viable form of medicine. And yet doctors all over the world are using it with great success. I've heard stories coming out of India of doctors using it for their oncology patients with just miraculous results.
Amazing.
And then the last one I want to mention, there's so many. There's just so many applications for technology that we could do a whole podcast on this alone. Actually, I teach a whole workshop on just this alone at my retreats. But there's one more that I think is particularly interesting. And that is, there was this researcher, last name of Myers. I think Stanley Myers. I think his name is Stanley Myers, but don't quote me. I think it was definitely Myers. Anyway, he developed an engine, a car engine that would run on water. And we've all heard of hydrogen fuel cells, right? And this is touted as being some new sustainable model for the future, but there's a lot of issues with hydrogen fuel cells. They're extremely volatile. It's really hard to create them. It's really hard to maintain them, like all of this. And this engine was able to run on literally any kind of water, because
Wow.
you could use distilled water, you could use lake water, you could get a gallon out of your pool. It doesn't matter. You put that in there, and then it runs on an electrolysis process, which is similar to the hydrogen fuel cells in that it ends up splitting the hydrogen from the oxygen, and then it oxidizes the hydrogen, and you're actually able to get this, 100 miles per single gallon of water.
Wow. 100 miles per gallon.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, per single gallon of water. And the only waste that it produces, I mean, forget about air pollution, it just produces water.
Yes.
So it's just rain coming out of the back of your car, watering the crops along the way to your destination. And so, of course, he was murdered really brutally. He was in a restaurant. I mean, he actually got really far. His company got pretty far. And there was another company out of Japan who was doing something similar at the same time. So they were bought off, the other company in Japan. There were some, I forget, it was energy companies or oil companies or car companies, whoever it was, that bought up all of their patents and then silenced them and shut the company down.
Wow.
And they just profited massively. Well, it's par for the course. But Myers wasn't willing to do that. He wasn't willing to sell out. And so they had to knock him off. He was at a restaurant and he took a sip of cranberry juice, and then he stood up and said, "I've been poisoned and keeled over dead."
Wow.
And then they bought up his patents anyways.
Wow.
So hopefully we'll see a revival of his work somehow.
I'm sure. I mean, the more this information gets out there and the more people realize the importance of it, it's going to continue to flow and get out there. And I want to circle back to later in the podcast, this whole idea of basically these water mafias where people are committing atrocious crimes, such as you just described, out of greed, out of simply wanting to make money and profit off of this water. And we're going to circle back to that at some point later in the podcast. But
just a little teaser for your listeners.
Yes, completely. Continue to listen. It's going to get very deep. I would love to circle back to the healing capabilities of water for the human vessel. We know of the ecological ramifications. We know of some of the technological ones. But you taught me in one of your classes that the water you drink turns into your blood within 5 minutes. And when I heard that, it drove home a point that I thought I already understood, but it really sank in deeper to understand that this water that I'm drinking is becoming my life force as it assimilates into my entire bloodstream. And you also have shared, and I've heard others share this as well, that there's no point in looking into changing your diet if you're not willing to change the water you drink. So I would love to ask you two questions. One, what is the difference between this bulk water that most people are drinking and the structured crystalline water that you discuss? And what are some of the physical, emotional, spiritual changes that one experiences when they switch over to drinking this structured crystalline water?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And you're so right about that because, as we said in the beginning, you're 70% water by volume. We've all heard this. Well, you're like, when you're born, you're about 90% water. By the time you're an elder, you're about 50% water by volume. There are a lot of researchers who say that really it's the whole aging process is just a process of drying out. And all of the attendant disease states that come with aging and inflammation, they are all results also of drying out and of dehydration. And I think one thing that we kind of take for granted is just how crucial water is to every single function that the body performs. There isn't a single thing, not a single thing that happens in your body that doesn't involve water. And think about how many quadrillions of miracles your body is performing in every single second, right? Like every cell that functions on protein folding, those proteins are only able to fold because each protein is surrounded by 10,000 water molecules. And those molecules are shifting phases from bulk to structured. And that's what gives proteins the backbone to stand up or the relaxation to fold. Everything the body does. And so, as you said, you can be eating a really high quality diet, man. You can be spending half your paycheck at a Whole Foods and getting everything, gluten-free, farm raised, happy cows, just everything perfect and dialed in. But if you're drinking swag water, then your body actually isn't even going to be able to absorb all of those nutrients, because water metabolism mediates the uptake of all the nourishment, all the nutrients into our bodies. And so it's really our first line of health. And as I'm sure you know, you ask any indigenous wisdom keeper and they'll tell you that water is our primary medicine.
Yes.
So it's important to look at the kind of water we drink, and it's equally as important, if not more so, to look at our lifestyle factors that affect hydration. Because people ask me all the time, what kind of water should I be drinking and how much water should I be drinking? And that is really important. But even that doesn't really matter as much if your body isn't optimized to be able to absorb it. Then it could just go right through you, right? So I'd like to circle back to that at the end of this question, but I want to address what you said first, which is the difference between different kinds of water. So tap water, of course, it's almost not even worth calling it water. It's like tap liquid because, water is H2O, but you start putting fluoride and chlorine and then all of these additives, these pH balancers, and then you have all of the greases and the lubricants from the pumps and the pipes that are leaching into the water. And then they have to put stabilizers in the water to balance those out. And not to mention all of the heavy metals that are leaching into the water from the pipes. And then you have, especially in big cities, you have what's called a closed looped system, or what hydrologists affectionately refer to as toilet to tap, where the water is being used in homes and businesses, then it goes to the treatment facility, it's treated, and then it's pumped right back to homes and businesses again. And so as a result of this constant loop, you're literally drinking water that has been through other people's bodies. And I gotta say, as much as they are doing their absolute best at those treatment facilities, there are some things that are just such submicron particulates that you just can't get them all out. And of particular concern are the pharmaceuticals.
Yes.
So they've tested tap water at in the major cities in the US, and they found over 50 pharmaceuticals in this water, especially SSRI medications and birth control pills and all these different things.
Wow.
Now, all of these, of course, have been more or less tested, depending on how much you trust pharmaceutical companies. They've been more or less tested in clinical trials, one by one individually at the prescribed dosages, but it's really a massive experiment that's being played on the public right now. What happens if we give teeny tiny doses of 50 different pharmaceuticals to people all of the time? What effect is that going to have on people's psychology? And I think when you see the mental state that people are in as a whole, a broad brush stroke here, but in cities, there's something in the water,
Completely.
So if you have to drink tap water, first of all, I don't believe that anybody has to drink tap water, because there are always springs available, usually closer than most people realize. But insofar as you might have to, and certainly if you live in a city, you might have to shower in it. When you take a bath, your body absorbs 1.5 liters of water through your skin. So filtering our shower water and our bath water is really important as well. Definitely recommend getting a super high quality filter. A lot of people, to avoid the tap water phenomenon, they go with distilled or reverse osmosis water. And a lot of even hydrologists are super pro reverse osmosis, because there's this paradigm of, it's kind of the same paradigm that we had around food maybe 50, 60 years ago, where we said, okay, if we take sugar And we strip it of everything until it's just a pure carbohydrate. It's just a pure white sugar. It's so pure now that it must be healthier, right? And we did the same thing with wheat. You know, we stripped it of the molasses and the B vitamins and the soluble and insoluble fibers. And we said, okay, now we're just left with the pure carbohydrate, is pure white flour. And because it's so pure, it must be better for us, right? And now we know that's not true. We know that anytime you take something and you process it, it can turn a medicine into a poison. You know, we see the same thing with the coca plant. You can chew on coca leaves all day and it's going to be really good for your body. But if you refine that down to cocaine, then that is poison. So we're doing the same thing with water when it comes to distillation and reverse osmosis. They say, oh, if you just have the pure H2O, then that's going to be the best for you because it's so pure. And unfortunately, it's just not true. It's too refined, it's too processed. And you'll never find just pure H2O in nature. In nature, water is a whole, complete, well-rounded, balanced being that contains all of the elements, earth, air, fire, and ether. And it also contains a broad spectrum scope of minerals and electrolytes. And we need these for our healthy functioning and our healthy digestion. And it'll also contain beneficial microbes, just like food grown in organic soil will contain a spectrum of beneficial microbes that our bodies need. You know, the majority of our neurotransmitters are actually created in our gut. And so if we're not getting a broad enough spectrum of microbes, just the cascade, the ripple effects in our health and our psychology are just too broad to go into here. But it's really important that we have a broad spectrum water. And a water that not only has those physical components of the minerals and the microbes, but also to have the energetic components as well, that it's been exposed to beneficial light frequencies, beneficial sound frequencies, and that it has structure. And the structure is really what sets the stage for the rest of it. Because your body can't really absorb water that's unstructured very well. It's just not bioavailable. That's why so many people, you know, they mean well and they say, okay, I get it. Water's important. I need to hydrate. They start drinking a lot of water and they just start going to the bathroom a ton, it just washes straight through them. Mm-hmm. A certain level of that is totally natural. Like, of course you drink more, you're going to pee more, but most people are drinking water that not only isn't hydrating them, but it's actively dehydrating them. So there's a few factors. If you're drinking reverse osmosis or distilled water, it's what hydrologists call an aggressive solvent, because it's had everything robbed from it, everything leached from it, because the molecules are so chaotic, the hydrogen bonds are forming and breaking apart billions of times per second. It just wants to fill itself back up again. It's hungry. And so it will actually leach minerals from your body. In some cases, if you're going through a really intense cleanse, that can be a good thing, but there are better ways. So I just want to add that caveat, because I know some people are super pro distilled water if they're going through like a heavy metal cleanse or something like that. And it can be good in those cases, but also there are better ways. There are more effective ways than using distilled water for that. But yeah, it leaches minerals from your body. And so it's really important to make sure that the water is already full when you drink it. Victor Schauberger calls it the difference between mature and immature water. So mature or immature water is water that may or may not already have some structure to it, but the structure basically forms the matrix, right? And then it's a matter of what you fill that matrix with that determines if it's mature water. MJ Pangman, another great researcher, says that really our relationship with water is like a dance. And forming the structure of the water is like setting the stage for the dance. And then the stimuli, the vibratory and energetic stimuli that you fill the water with, that's really the music for the dance. And so we have the physical components, the quantitative components of getting that earth element in there with the minerals, getting that air element in there by making sure that it's able to breathe, it's able to exchange gases like oxygen and carbonic acid, making sure that it has, a healthy amount of nanobubbles, that it's aerated. So those are sort of the quantitative elements of creating healthy water. And then the qualitative elements of creating healthy water are making sure that, it's hearing beautiful music, or it's exposed to the Schumann resonance, or it's exposed to a little bit of sunshine. Not a lot of sunshine because the heat can break down the water molecules, but a bit of sunshine or moonlight or starlight or red lights. Actually, red light therapy is one of the most surefire ways to build up a really strong exclusion zone, another word for crystalline, a really strong crystalline phase of the water. So yeah, I would say those are the main things to focus on if you're transforming dead water into living water. You want to set the stage, you want to play the music, you want to make sure it has all the 5 elements in there, you want to make sure it's quantitatively and qualitatively mature water.
Beautiful. And just to clarify for our listeners, what is the core difference in the molecular structure of structured crystalline water? What is going on in that water that is very different from the water we are drinking today, but very similar to the water our ancestors drank?
Mm-hmm. Well, our ancestors, for longer than we've been Homo sapiens. They say we've been Homo sapiens for 200,000 years. And for far longer than that, we've been drinking preferably spring water. I mean, water from nature in general. Of course, the water in streams now I would not recommend whatsoever, but spring water is still one of the highest sources of water that we can access. Naturally, water comes from the ground, and so our blood is bestowed to us by Mother Earth. But in the current paradigm, we have all of these corporate and municipal surrogate stand-ins between ourselves and the source of our life. But when it comes to spring water, it automatically has that structure because it's drawn to the surface in a vortex of lunar gravity. And it's drawn from deep, deep, deep underground, deep in the bedrock, where it's been for hundreds to even thousands of years, depending on the depth and the age of that aquifer. And then on the way to the surface, it encounters all of the filtering layers of the soil and carbon deposits and rocks and roots. And it also encounters all of the minerals and electrolytes of the clay and the rocks along the way. And it also contains these geomagnetic, electromagnetic influences of any particularly magnetic rocks that might be in the aquifer. So it's a really healthy, well-rounded water. It's only within the past maybe 2 or 3 generations that humans have fallen out of this habit. And that's just crazy for me to think of, like, wow, for hundreds of thousands of years, we've been drinking this kind of water. And then within only 2 or 3 generations, we've been so disconnected from our source that now you ask people to drink water from the ground and they're like, ew, isn't that dangerous?
Yeah.
Like,
wow.
Your food doesn't come from a grocery store. Your water doesn't come from a tap. They both come from the earth. And it's so important to establish that connection again.
Yes.
So that's one aspect of your question. And then the other aspect is, what is this structure that we're talking about? And basically, so we all know that water is H2O, right? Dihydrogen oxide. But really, it's the way that those water molecules come together that determine everything. So, there are over 63 anomalies about water that scientists currently don't understand, like over 63 ways that water behaves that are just total mysteries that no lab can explain. And we're starting to realize that the reason it's been so elusive to us this whole time is because we've been looking at water molecules individually. Same reason why we've been thinking distilled and reverse osmosis would be good for us, because we just think, oh, we have these little H2O molecules that are pure, so that must be good. But that's like looking at one human being and thinking you can understand all of humanity as a whole. It doesn't work that way. Like, we are who we are, and humanity is who it is because of the relationships that we form, because of our family bonds, because of our community bonds, because of our cultural bonds, and those those cultures, that diversity, the richness of the tapestries of our connections and the information and the artistry that's held in those connections, like that's really what makes humanity beautiful. And it's the same with water. So if it's bulk dead water, the molecules are bouncing around randomly. They're somewhat isolated from one another. They're forming and breaking apart billions of times per second. They have no time to snuggle up, connect with one another, have a little dance together, and exchange information. Like we said before, each cluster of water molecules has 440,000 panels on it that make it richly intelligent, that make it patterned with beautiful vibratory information about its life and its experience. But if those clusters can't form, then there's no cohesion, there's no pattern, there's no structure. It can't conduct the frequencies of life, these signals of life. But when they do come together with a specific bond angle, I think it's a 109-degree bond angle, they form these beautiful hexagonal crystalline.
Yes.
I think we just have a new word there. I'm gonna TM that one. Hexagonal.
Perfect.
So they form these matrices that are single layer sheets, but they're not glued together by the protons, and so they're really flexible. And it's actually beyond solid, liquid, and gas. It's actually a fourth phase of water. Dr. Gerald Pollack calls it exclusionary zone water because the molecules are so tightly connected. They're just hugging one another so sweetly that it excludes any particulates, any toxins, anything like that from its environment. So this is one of the ways that it's so beneficial for our health, because if we're made of the highest quality hexagonal water, then it will exclude toxicity. It will literally push toxins out from our cells. Now I think it's really important to note that all bio water is structured to some extent. You're only alive because the water in your body is in a crystalline form. That's why you're not just we can say you're 99.95% water molecules, but you're not just a puddle on the floor, right? Your water molecules are in this gel phase, in this exclusionary zone phase. And we see a direct correlation between the quality of the structure of your water molecules within your cells and your intracellular and extracellular fluids and the quality of your health. So the more bulk and destructured your water becomes, it immediately translates into aging and disease. Like there's been no clearer correlation between anything that I've found in my 12 years of being obsessed with health and wellness. I mean, this really is the cutting edge of medicine, because, there are a lot of people who say that inflammation is the root of all disease. Well, you can't have inflammation in a well-hydrated body, because inflammation, comes from the Latin to inflame. It's literally like setting parts of your body on fire. It's too much heat. And what do you do when something's on fire? You need water to put that out. So inflammation is the root of all disease. Yes, but dehydration is the root of inflammation. And there are some people who say that acidity is the root of all disease. And if you look at the physiology of your body becoming more acidic, it's one of the adaptive responses that happens when there isn't enough water for the body to carry out its functions, right? So more and more we're seeing at the root of every disease state, it's not just a lack of enough water, like quantitative amount of water, but really, really this qualitative difference of the water. It's not necessarily how much, but what phase is the water of your body. It's in this highly crystalline phase, baby, you're going to be healthy, happy, vibrant, energetic, and it's really profound. This is actually what my new course is all about. It's all about just the bio waters, just the waters in your body, how to really optimize your physicality in that way. It's been super fun to dive into.
Beautiful. We're going to speak about that towards the end and push people towards that course, because I think it's going to be an invaluable resource for everybody interested in this topic. I would love to shift gears a little bit with a story, and it relates to everything we're sharing. But I remember there was a moment, I may have been in high school actually, where I went to go get some water out of the back of my mom's car. And, it was just a big case of like Aquafina or Poland Spring or something. And it was a hot summer day. and I had taken one of the water bottles out of the car, and I can literally see that the bottle had partially melted, and I can see this solution of water and plastic in the bottle. And I was already aware at that point in my life about the importance of the quantity of water to drink. But I remember after that day, I started to do some research into how much plastic we are drinking daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly. And after that point, I only drank out of glass bottles. I became the kid at school who always had a big glass jug. The security guards in my school would be making fun of me. Kids would be laughing at me, and I loved it, and at that point, I became very passionate and would educate others. But in one of your courses, you said people who only drink bottled water might swallow 90,000 particles of microplastics with each year. And I'm sure it may even be more than that.
It equates to about 1 credit card worth of plastic per week.
Per week. Oh
Per
my.
week.
Oh my. Isabel, I would love for you to speak about the litany of issues we are facing as on a global scale, drinking out of plastic bottles, because I have so many people in my life, so many people in my family who still go out to the department store and buy a big 40 bottle package of, water that is already unhealthy, but then they're drinking it out of this terrible plastic. And it's a battle I've been fighting for many years, but I would love for you to so articulately describe the dangers that we are actually facing.
Well, I'm so glad to hear that you were a woke high schooler and you started avoiding that young. It's really, gosh, it's so important. And I feel for the people who go to Sam's Club and get these big cases of water bottles. Like, it's convenient, know? And
completely.
if you think of water as being an inanimate object, then convenience is going to be the most important thing for that, And so it's really just a matter of shifting this paradigm, shifting this relationship, because when you start recognizing that water is not an inanimate object, then it doesn't even matter, whether it's in plastic or whatever. You can't treat it. You can't objectify it like that.
Very true.
Anymore. And there's an analogy that I really like here that's really accurate. So what happens when you soak a tea bag in water?
It extracts whatever is in the tea bag.
Yeah, you make tea.
Yep.
So what happens when you soak plastic in water? You're going to get plastic tea. It's as simple as that. Water is a solvent. It dissolves things into it. It's the universal solvent. It dissolves everything, I like to say it's also, when you dissolve something into water, you have a solution, and water is the solution to solve or dissolve all of the problems. But anyways.
There's so much amazing water etymology that we can get into as well, but that's a whole nother conversation. Really, there's so much.
We could do a whole podcast just on that. That would be fun.
Yeah, completely. Completely. But yes, you're making basically plastic tea.
Totally. You're making plastic tea. And we already know that plastic is not biodegradable, meaning life and soil doesn't break it down. So what does break it down? Well, it's photodegradable and thermodegradable, meaning that light and heat are what start to break it down. So anytime you have a plastic water bottle that's exposed to light of any kind, even on a teeny tiny little microscopic imperceptible level, those xenoestrogens are breaking down into the water. Excuse me. And so even if you were to somehow keep your plastic bottles away from the light somehow, a lot of companies are doing what's called a hot fill. So to save time and money, basically they pour water into the plastic bottle while it's still hot. So there's no time for the plastic to off gas. Like typically, standard practice for making plastic, anything of plastic, is you pour it into the mold. And then depending on what kind of plastic it is, you leave it in the factory or in a warehouse to let it off gas for anywhere from weeks to months to even like a year or more, depending on what kind of plastic it is, right? You let it off gas. But what they're doing now, I know Fiji does this, some other companies do this, where they just pour the water in straight away while the plastic is still forming.
Wow.
And so it just off gases right into the bottle. Now, what's so crucial about this is that plastic contains what's called xenoestrogens, and xeno just means foreign. So if it were phytoestrogens, it would be from a plant source, right? So like soybeans, for example, have a lot of phytoestrogens. Beer has a lot of phytoestrogenic properties.
Yes.
These are more natural, but still concerning sources of estrogen. But xenoestrogens are just totally foreign to us. They're artificial. And so estrogen is this more feminine hormone. Of course, men and women both have estrogen to some extent, but men really do not need much estrogen at all in their bodies. And our endocrine systems are sensitive in parts per billion, meaning that they're sensitive to the most teeny, tiny little amounts. Like you have 7 endocrine glands, and they correspond more or less in location and kind of more or less in function to your 7 chakras. So they're like one of the physical counterparts to your chakras. Yes. So if you think of your chakras as electromagnetic centers, 7 electromagnetic centers in your body, and your electrical the physical counterpart of the electrical aspect of those chakras would be the 7 main nerve plexes. So right where your 7 endocrine glands are, you actually also have 7 main nerve plexes, or places where tons of nerve fibers come together. Mm-hmm. So that's the electrical component. And then the magnetic component. So like your electrical capacity is like your mentality and your thoughts, and your magnetic capacity is like your feelings and your emotions. Yes. This is according to Dr. Joe Dispenza. And so your electromagnetic thoughts and emotions chakras, from which you pattern your entire world and perception and paradigm of reality from these energy centers, they have the physical counterparts and the electrical nerve plexus and the more emotional endocrine glands.
Yes.
And they regulate all of your hormonal function. And your hormones are really the way that you relate to your entire world. Your hormones regulate sort of the filter through which you perceive and respond to everything. And so keeping your hormones in balance is crucial. It's crucial. And when we have so much extra xenoestrogens coming into our super sensitive endocrine systems, it's just throwing everything out of whack. Sperm counts are the lowest they've ever been ever. Testosterone levels are extremely low. In the United States especially, we just have such horrifically terrible rates of infertility compared to other places. And it's that way in a lot of the Western or the developed world, and increasingly so all of the time. This infertility is a massive issue, and it's just having ripple effects into so many aspects of our health. So we really need to start recognizing that plastic is not edible, and yet we are eating a credit card's worth every week.
Wow. Yeah, I've learned that your hormonal system is really what is driving the vehicle of your thoughts and feelings. And to know that so many people are consuming this exogenous form of estrogen, which is totally imbalancing their endocrine system, is it's scary. And it makes my conspiratorial mind go to places thinking that these people know exactly what they're doing.
It definitely creates more passivity in the populace. It certainly does. I mean, between xenoestrogens and fluoride, like you couldn't ask for a more passive combination than that.
Yeah. And then not only that, but to know that the water you drink turns into your blood within 5 minutes. I mean, that's the only fact you need to know to understand that. People used to say if you control a nation's food, you control the people, but it's obviously more true. If you control their water, you control them fully.
Totally. In fact, in Chinese, the symbol for control is the same as the symbol for water.
Wow. I did not know that. That's incredible. Wow. So, oh wow, there's so many different directions we can go in. One more thing I would like to discuss regarding the differences in water is there seems to be a fad nowadays regarding alkaline water. And I am someone who, when I started to change the water I drank, one of my older brothers was a big influence for me. And he actually bought a Kangen machine. And this was one of the most exciting times of our lives because we really had so much faith into this machine. When I started drinking this water, I believe I did have a very deep positive effect. Maybe some of that was placebo, and maybe some of that was just having some further filtration of the New York tap water I was drinking. But after some years of drinking this water, I actually started to have an awareness that I wasn't feeling properly hydrated, no matter how much I drank. And I simply had this awareness and realization as well that all this water is still coming through all of these pipes that have right angles and are being cleansed at these, treatment centers such as you described. And then it's coming to my Kangen filter and it's alkalizing the water in this very mysterious way, which I didn't understand the science of how I was doing it. And something that's just told me to switch over to natural spring water, which I can source from nearby my home or upstate New York, which I began doing. But years later, now I see so many companies, so many people who are trying to switch to a healthier version of water, and they're just going into this alkalinity obsession, which from my studies, I've shown not to really be of that much benefit. I would love for you to speak on this controversial topic and let us know what you think about it.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Actually, I was in a similar place when I first started getting into water as well. I was on that Kangen kick for a while. It's the trend, and I think that in the short term, it can have some benefits, but those benefits are derived from the fact that these ionizing, alkalizing machines actually create more hydrogen in the water. It's not because of the pH difference. It's because the water has a higher hydrogen content. And we actually, over the long term, we see some negative effects from it. So, alkaline water can be either really beneficial or really not, depending on what makes it alkaline. So, typically what we're talking about here with these filters is basically reverse osmosis tap water that's been alkalized through an electrolysis process. And most people do suffer from acidosis just due to diet and lifestyle and inflammation and dehydration and destructuring of our body water. So drinking more water in general, regardless of what kind it is, even if it's crappy bottled water, you're drinking more and you're going from a place of being dehydrated, then any kind of water is going to be good for you. Your body needs it. Your body wants it. So yes, you're going to have a lot of beneficial effects, especially if you just paid $5,000 for a machine and you're like, this is epic. I'm going to drink a ton of water every single day. You're going to feel really good, because you're just drinking more. And it is good for our bodies to get a little bit more towards the alkaline side of the spectrum for healing, but only temporarily, because alkalosis is just as dangerous as acidosis. And once you feel any ailments that might be created or exacerbated by acidosis, you really want to maintain a neutral pH in your body. Your blood is meant to be very, very neutral, right around 7, or if you're a blood type O, even just tiny little bit acidic. And what most people don't realize is when you jump from, so just to give like a background for people, like the acid base scale is from 1 to 14. And so when we say 7, that means neutral. That means neither acidic nor alkaline.
Yes.
So what most people don't realize, I think, is that when you jump from a 7 to an 8, that's not just a 1-point difference. That's what you're measuring is whole orders of magnitude, right, between each one. So if you're drinking a 9 water or a 10 water. Like that's way too alkaline. Like it's not just 2 points difference, it's orders of magnitude difference. So really there are a few different ways that you can make alkaline water. You can make it really easily at home just by adding some baking soda, or you can use one of these electrolysis machines, right? So the ionizers, though, they produce this really unnatural alkaline water by electrocuting the water molecule to split it in half, and that separates the hydrogen and the oxygen. And we have to remember, whatever we do to our water, we do to ourselves. Whatever we do to our water, we do to ourselves. It's so true on every scale of the spectrum, from the micro to the macro. And so we don't want to feel electrocuted. So we don't want to do that to our water either. And then this second method with the alkalizing ionizing machine, it produces water that contains hydrogen gas, because you're splitting the H2 from the O, right? Now, interestingly, you don't receive the same health benefits from drinking baking soda water, which is alkaline, that you would receive from drinking the electrically alkalized water. If it were just a matter of pH, then the benefits should be the same either way, baking soda water or electrically alkalized water, right? And again, you do see short-term beneficial health effects. You know, these sales representatives out there, they can show you some amazing studies, and those studies are true. But I invite people, you know, do your own research. Don't listen to me. Don't listen to the sales reps. Do your own research and look for long-term human studies of people using these alkalizing ionizers. You can have a really hard time finding them. The reason why the short-term benefits happen are because the second contains so much hydrogen. And even some of the original researchers who were involved in creating and promoting these ionizers way back in the beginning in Japan, they've actually shifted their entire careers now and shifted away from the alkaline movement, and now they just focus on hydrogen water. So I think that's really telling in a way. But it can actually cause damage over time to be drinking this water, because your body has to go through this really energy intensive process. Again, like you said, water becomes your blood within 5 minutes of drinking it. And so if your body has to continually bring down a pH from 9 down to 7 every time you drink water, over the years, it's going to get less efficient at doing that. And if you look at live blood analysis of people who have been drinking this kind of water over the long term, they have a preponderance of ruptured cells. So their cells actually can't stand being in too high of an alkaline environment, and they rupture. And excuse me, you know, you need certain parts of your body to be really acidic. You know, you need your gut to be super acidic. That's why we have acidophilus. You know, it's literally acidophile, acid-loving bacteria. We need a lot of that. We need very strong hydrochloric acid in our stomachs, or HCl. And the more we create a more alkaline environment in our stomachs, we can develop things like H. pylori, for example, which contributes to ulcers. I know a lot of people who've been drinking this water and they just feel bloated all the time, and they can't quite figure out why they feel so bloated. And I'm like, babe, it's the water that you're drinking. They're like, no, the best water. My sales rep told me so. So, and it's not structured. It doesn't structure the water either. It actually does exactly the opposite. It's so funny to hear some of these reps talk about, oh, you know, it mimics nature, and you know, Kangen actually means from the source. And yet it's like, okay, so why don't you actually go to the source to get your water? Like, go to a spring, go to the source. But you know, they say, yeah, it's structured crystalline water, and the process of electrolysis rips the hydrogens apart. That's the whole point of of electrolysis, is it rips the hydrogens apart, and all of structure has to do with the hydrogen bonding, with how they come together. And so by definition, it does not create structured water. And yeah, it's a whole rabbit hole. It's definitely a whole rabbit hole, but I encourage people to really look into it and don't fall for the hype. And, you know, we don't need to be commodifying water. We don't need to be paying $5,000 for a filter that doesn't structure, it doesn't mineralize, it doesn't. There are some great filters out there, and some of them are quite pricey. You know, they last a lifetime and they really create super high quality water. So I do think it's good to invest in your water for sure, but we just need to be conscientious about how we do it.
Yes, completely. This is a perfect segue into the topic of the commodification of water
Mm-hmm.
and how these privatized companies work to not only make a profit off of water, but to literally make a killing. You know, there are people
Mm-hmm.
who are really suffering from what these
Oh my
companies
gosh.
are doing. I would love for you to just simply explain the horrors of privatized water and not only how it's affecting the planet, but how it's affecting us on every single facet of our humanity and existence.
Oh, it's just such a big topic. I'm so glad you asked it because I think this is one of the most important aspects of water that we all have to wake up to right now. It's really crucial. But we could do a whole podcast episode just on this
Yes.
alone. At first, I want to set the stage for people just to understand the current state of water in our world, because it's really easy for us in the first world to be unaware of the global water apartheid that exists between the global north and the global south. Right now, as we speak, 1 in every 3 human beings has no consistent access to clean drinking water. 1 in 3.
Wow.
And by 2050, that's only 29 years from now, right? It's estimated to be 1 in 2. So half of the population without clean drinking water in 30 years. And according to the World Health Organization, 80% of disease worldwide is caused by unclean drinking water. 80%. Now, hopefully by now, the little glimpse of our past conversation, you can see that the other 20% of disease can also be traced back to the state of our body waters and water metabolism disturbance. But for now, let's just say 80% of disease worldwide is caused by people not having access to clean drinking water. Now, this is absolutely something that we could easily fix if we put even a fraction as much energy into solving this crisis as we've put into tangling the corona crisis.
Yes.
But right now, every 8 seconds, a child dies from drinking dirty water. So since we started this podcast, I don't know how many kids that is, but probably in the hundreds.
Wow.
And in the third world, 90% of sewage is just discharged untreated into rivers and streams and coastal waters. In China, 80% of the major rivers are so degraded that they can no longer support life. 80% of the rivers, no fish can even live in them anymore. It's dismal. So not only have things been so polluted to this point, but as a result of this poor treatment, water is disappearing. She's withdrawing, which is predictable, of course, right? So every year, a new desert the size of Rhode Island is created in China, and drought-related sandstorms are plaguing the country. California and Arizona are already out of water. New Mexico will run out within the next 4 years or so. Like just all over the world, the planet is super dehydrated. Drought and desertification are just taking over. They're literally killing and inflaming our earth. So we have to ask ourselves, why is this? Why? How did we let it get to this point? And it's despicable, but the simple answer is supply and demand. Because we have a capitalistic paradigm, and if the source of life is privatized as a source of profit, then the more scarce it becomes, the more wealthy its owners are, the more valuable their limited clean water assets become. Because unlike oil or anything else, of course, water is the source of life. So if you control the source of life, like you mentioned before, then you control the lives of all of those who need it every single day. It's the most powerful substance on earth. And it's literally being used as a weapon of war in many places, including the Middle East. It's being used as a tool of war. And, most people don't realize that there are already water wars being fought all over the world. The World Bank president, was it president or vice president? Either, I forget, but one of the leaders of the World Bank, he said if the wars of the 20th century were fought over oil, the wars of the 21st century will be fought over water. And that's already happening now. Of course, in the media, it's played out to be, oh yeah, this is a religious conflict, or, you know, this is a migratory conflict, or whatever it is. But if you look deeper into the roots of it, you'll see that in almost every case, it's about water resources and drought and desertification, and people having to migrate and people stepping on each other's toes because of that. You know, right now in India, there are places that are so water poor that farmers have to go into their fields armed with axes against one another, against their neighbors, just to fight over the limited, very low wells, access to the wells that are running low. So it's really intense because so many poor countries, they have to export huge amounts of virtual water because they desperately need money, because they've been forced, often blackmailed by economic hitmen in the World Bank and the IMF to pay off their debts through monoculture crop exports, which waste huge amounts of water. So when we're talking about virtual water, we're not talking about they're actually exporting their liquid water, but they have to pour so much water into the creation of certain products or certain crops that they have no water left for their own people anymore. They end up using all of their remaining water supplies, not to give to their people, but to create whatever the World Bank or the IMF deems to be profitable from their country, just so they can try to dig themselves out of a debt that they will never get out from under, very purposefully, you know, even if it means that their own citizens are dying every 8 seconds, a child, you know. The World Bank is a murderous bully, and it's forcing virtual water trade in countries where people are dying every day because of this lack of access to clean water. And it's because of consumer demand in first world countries like ours, like the US. You know, economics are not just dry numbers. They're people's lives. There was a meeting of, I think it was a World Bank meeting, and there was a big protest. I want to say it was in Vietnam. Oh, I should get my details right before I tell the story.
No problem. There was a protest somewhere.
There was a protest against these economic policies that the World Bank was coming up with. And there was a farmer who climbed on top of the fence in between where the meeting was being held and where the protests were. And he was wearing a sign that says, "The World Bank kills farmers." And he took his own life right there on top of the fence because there was no water. There was not enough water for the farmers. There's not enough water for anyone. And it was a direct result of the policies that these men in suits in boardrooms were making on behalf of first world countries like ours. I mean, what more powerful and resounding message could he hope to send to the world? And yet we haven't heard of him. You know, there are people, there are activists and guardians who are giving their lives every single day to protect this precious commodity, and that we just completely take for granted. And so we have to think, okay, well, the UN and the World Bank and the IMF, actually, you know, maybe it was a protest against the IMF. I'm sorry, it was. It wasn't the World Bank. It was a protest against the IMF. His signs that IMF kills farmers. Anyway, the point remains.
Yes.
So you have to wonder, like, okay, what's their skin in the game here? Why do they keep making policies like this that are so destructive? And it has to do with the water cartel that you mentioned. You know, the most powerful cartel in the world. It's not a drug cartel. It's not an arms cartel. It's a water cartel. Suez, Veolia, Bechtel, RWE Thames, and all of their subsidiary companies, they basically bought up water rights all over the world. And this has been happening since the 80s, since the Reagan, Thatcher economics era. You know, back then, no one would have imagined that water would be traded like shares on the stock exchange. Back then, no one could imagine paying more for water than we pay for gasoline. And yet that's where we find ourselves now. And right now, as a result, all over the world, if you can afford to pay for water, then you have the right to live. If you cannot afford to pay for water, then you have the right to die of thirst or waterborne disease. And that's just how it is right now. And when we talk about paying for water, I think in the first world, we say, oh, well, okay, so get a job, water's cheap. But because of this water cartel, certain places in the world where it's been privatized, there's no incentive for them to bring water or make water infrastructure available to places who can't afford to pay top dollar for it. So, people might be paying. I've heard stories, I forget exactly which country it comes from, but I've heard stories of people paying half of their monthly income just for water. And
Wow.
you really can't do that. And in places where they can't even afford to do that, I mean, a lot of the videos and the images that we see of women walking with gallons on their head in Africa, sometimes miles to go down to the watering hole to get dirty water to bring back to their village. Sometimes that village has a well. It's not that there isn't the infrastructure there. It's who owns that infrastructure and what are they charging for it? There's a story of a village in Africa where you have to pay to turn on the pump, right? You have to pay to turn on the faucet.
Mm-hmm.
And a house was burning down and there was water right there because there was a well right next door. But the neighbors couldn't afford to get water to put the house out, and 2 little girls died inside. And that's the state of water in the world right now. We can no longer afford to be blind to this.
Wow.
It's, if you're familiar with the term economic hitman, then I really recommend reading a book by that title. I think it's called Economic Hitman, but it basically explains the way that blackmail works on the global stage. And, any country that stands up for their citizens' right to water, they try to make it a public utility, then the economic hitmen come in. And if the economic hitmen can't blackmail them sufficiently, then the country is painted out to be socialist, and the US will end up backing a coup to overthrow that government. It's happened so many times in Latin America and South America now. So it's really, really hard for leaders of small countries to stand up to the this international water cartel. I'm not sure where that stands now, but for many decades, they were trying to make water a public commodity and they just were not able to. So yeah, I really think water privatization is the most important question of our lifetime because, well, water privatization and transhumanism, I would say, are the most important questions of our lifetime. Because again, there are already water wars being fought. And right now is the turning point. Right now is the deciding factor. Our generation is the deciding factor as to whether or not future generations will have a right to life or whether life is just something to be bought and sold like Coca-Cola. We have to be super involved in this. We have to be super involved. So I don't want to just bum people out without giving them like some resources or some ideas for what direction to go and how they can get involved and how they can help.
Yes, this was my exact next question because this is just so terrifying to say the least, and it brings such a heavy heart to my being just hearing some of the stories you're sharing and being aware of some of the research I've done on this, and it can feel very doom and gloomy when you look at this stark reality, but it is absolutely necessary that we face the reality of this crisis, of this greed that we are dealing with. And I want to segue into how learning from our indigenous brothers and teachers, learning their wisdom, their teachings surrounding how to work and pray and be with this water can assist us in changing our relationship to this water, because that's essentially what you're describing we need to do more than anything, is shift our perspective and form a different relationship with this water into a relationship that is conscious, that is grateful, and that is loving. And before we segue into some of these ancient traditional teachings, I'd love for you to shed some light on some organizations right now who are doing great work to protect water and to fight some of these water cartels that you are describing here.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There are so many organizations doing really, really great work. I want to invite people not to get caught in the illusion of thinking that raising awareness and sharing information alone is actual activism. I think that you sort of get caught in this cycle of like, oh, let me repost this and I'm making a difference.
Yep.
And it's a false sense of helping.
I agree.
But there's a beautiful side to that, because the truth is, like, as hopeless as we can sometimes feel in the face of these massive issues, the more we take action, the less hopeless we feel. There's a direct correlation. Like, the more we get involved, the more hopeful we feel, the more we feel we have efficacy, the more we feel, you know, if you've been depressed because of everything that's going on in the world, the most surefire way to get yourself out of that slump is to take action, is really to take actionable steps. And raising awareness can be a part of that. But please be aware that that needs to just be one fraction of your strategy. And so I recommend everyone whipping out their pens and pencils now, taking notes on this part, and really crafting a strategy for yourself. Do a bit of research, you know, draw up a plan for yourself. Say, you know, I really resonate with these initiatives more so than these. And here are the ways that I feel that I can be involved. And, you know, really come up with, like, even if it's just 1 hour per week, you know, or a few hours per week. A lot of us, you know, due to the corona restrictions right now, the medical tyranny that's happening, we can't necessarily get out and do the volunteer work that we would normally do. But there are so many other ways to do it. So this is really my prayer and my invitation for you. And there are some of you who are going to take up this charge, and I really commend you, and I really celebrate you, and I really want to honor you and acknowledge you in advance for that.
Yes.
So a good place to start. And again, this is not activism. This is just informing yourself, but it's a good place to start, is reading Maud Barlow's work. Maud Barlow is an incredible activist in the water movement. Blue Future is one of her most recent books. Blue Gold is probably the most famous. That one was actually turned into a documentary. So you could even invite your family over to watch Blue Gold, or Last Call at the Oasis, or Cadillac Desert. Actually, I can't remember if Cadillac Desert is a book or a movie. It's definitely a book. I don't remember if they turned it into a movie. Anyways, start with those. You can also get involved with your local watershed association. It's really important to get to know your own watershed. Just like you know your address, you should know your watershed as well, because we can't protect what we don't know. And you can support nonprofits like the Waterkeepers Alliance, that's run by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and the Blue Planet Project, that one's run by Maud Barlow. Those two, I think, on the global stage are doing the best work right now from what I've seen. There are also a couple of initiatives that are working on giving rights to bodies of water. So you can get involved with the Earth Law Center and the rightsofnature.org. And they're literally giving rivers and lakes human rights in a way.
Yes.
So right now in the US, there are about 90 pipelines, just like the Keystone Dakota Access Pipeline, that are being installed. And it's really important to get involved with that, because they are not getting the press that they received in North Dakota. You know, it was politically convenient at the time to have a big distraction, and they wanted to see, and I'm sorry if it sounds a little bit conspiracy right now, but they wanted to see who would get involved, who the activists were, what the strategies would be like for something like that. So it was allowed to become this massive thing that got a lot of media attention. They're not going to let that happen again. But 90 other projects just like that are happening. So you can find out where those are, get involved locally. Also, I'm involved with a project that is calling for a world water law, which would set water as really a unified global priority. And you can get involved with that and find out more at codes.earth/water law. But, even more important than all of that, I think the absolute most important thing that we could possibly do to restore water is, as you said, it comes down to the indigenous people. They're the ones on the front lines, who are fighting this manifest destiny that is still alive and well.
Yes.
Their water is being taken from them, their water is being polluted, and they're really at the front lines of it. So the most important thing we can do, and this is not as radical as it sounds when you think about the whole course of the history of the earth and human history, but we need to restore the rights and the land and the power and the respect to indigenous people. And I want to highlight the land. We need to restore the land to indigenous people. Land back. Get involved in the land back movement. They are the rightful stewards of the earth. And healing from capitalism means decolonizing our minds, decolonizing our relationships, and giving back what was stolen, because nothing stolen can flourish. Our lands and our waters will never flourish until they are restored. They cannot flourish as long as they're stolen and there's no justice. So get involved with projects like Survival International is one of my favorite indigenous rights advocacy groups. They actually work mostly with uncontacted indigenous tribes or tribes that are still living their traditional life ways around the world.
Amazing.
But just get involved with whatever your local indigenous activist groups are, because really that's our most precious human resource, I think. So yeah, as you said, not just restoring the land and getting involved with their organizations, but also really becoming disciples of their wisdom and really humbling ourselves to learn from their teachings, and letting the indigenous people guide the way, guide our activism, guide our steps, and guide our relationship with water. Because I think we forget that we are indigenous. We've become, the Aborigines call modern civilized humans mutants. And it's true in a way. We have become mutants because we're no longer fit to survive in our own natural habitat anymore.
Yes.
And yet we are each back in our ancestry, not even that far ago. We have countless indigenous ancestors that are speaking through our DNA. Victor Schauberger said that drinking the highest quality water gave him direct access to his ancestral wisdom. And at that time, in the late 1800s, they hadn't discovered DNA yet. So he didn't really have the scientific way of understanding that, but that was his direct personal experience. And now we know that your DNA is actually held in its chiral structure by a very strong backbone of highly structured icosahedral calathrate water molecules. And that the more structured that water is, the more perfect and tightly bound your double helix are entwined. And so the health of your DNA and your DNA does act as an antenna on some level. Our ability to tap into that ancestral wisdom is directly proportional to the health of our body waters. So we want to tap into our own ancestral history, our own indigeneity, and really, as you said, cultivate that relationship. I love that you use the word relationship, because that's what it all comes down to. Each one of us is in a relationship with water, whether we realize it or not. And every thriving relationship in our lives, whether it's our romantic relationships or our friendships or our family or whatever, it takes time and care and attention and conscientiousness. This is why it's not enough to just relegate water to convenience. It really takes stewarding. It takes stewarding. And in indigenous traditions all over the world, this was really more so in most cultures, it was more so a role of the feminine to steward water. Women in nearly every indigenous culture, there are so many water songs, water medicine songs,
yes,
that women would sing. And of course, everyone can sing them, men, women, child, trans, LGBT, everything. everybody sing to water. Let's steward this relationship. There's so many beautiful water medicine songs, and water really responds to the human voice in a really beautiful way. You can see in cymatics the way that water actually dances.
Yeah.
To sound.
That's so beautiful when you get to see those patterns, because we know, us who are spiritually aware know the change that is being done when this sound moves through this water. But to see some of those patterns, I'll link some YouTube videos on this podcast for some people to see if they've never seen them before. But it is so beautiful to see that reaction. It's amazing.
Yeah. And that's what's happening on a molecular level in our own bodies.
Yes.
As well, all the time.
I would love to.
So it's really about, go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you so much for all of those resources you just shared with us. I would love to. Oh,
actually, I'm sorry. Can I share one more resource before I forget? It's the most important one.
Please.
Of the whole podcast. Even if everybody tunes out everything else, you can forget everything else. This is the most important one. I can't believe I forgot to mention it. Okay. So I recommend everyone go to findaspring.com to find your local spring.
Yes.
That's the most important thing.
Thank you. I wanted to bring that up myself. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Or you can use Gaia GPS, which also has maps of springs, or check out your local geological survey to find your springs, or just ask the elders in your area where the springs are. Those are like the four main. Usually findaspring.com will have one that's near you. No matter where you are, you might be shocked at how prevalent they are. But definitely get to know your local springs.
Beautiful. And that website is open to the community. There's comments under each spring. It's amazing. Some people actually show the test results of the water under that spring that they are commenting on. And that has been an invaluable resource to me as well. So findaspring.com, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Invaluable.
Beautiful. Thank you for that reminder. I would love, as we begin to wrap up, to speak about the power and true effect that prayer and human emotion has on water. And I can give all the credit to my medicine men and medicine women family who I engage in ceremonial work with down in Ecuador for really showing me how much time and how much intention you could put into praying and blessing your water. And this is something that all of our ancestors have done for millennia. Simply, I believe it used to not only even have to be a ceremony, it was just a way of living, of being grateful for this water. But for me to go down this path of ceremonial work and engaging in different plant medicines and ceremonies of all sorts, and to see that in every ceremony, there is a moment where we consciously take some time to extend our appreciation, our gratitude for this source of life, and to bless it, to realize how much of an important element it truly is, was the foremost thing that shifted my relationship to water. So I would love for you to maybe share how this understanding of ceremony and some of these creation myths that include water and some of these esoteric, indigenous, ancient teachings that you have acquired over your research, how understanding the spiritual aspect and the importance of awareness behind this water has impacted you, and maybe share some of that information with all of us.
Oh gosh, it's so beautiful. And I love the way you describe it, because it really is a transformative practice. And it really is so ubiquitous throughout every ceremony you ever go to.
Yes.
No matter where it is, it's a part of every ceremony.
Yeah.
Even in the Western world.
Yeah, even the mundane ones,
of,
in weddings and baptisms and, bar mitzvahs, everything. Yep.
It's, even just praying before meals, you're affecting the molecular structure of the water in your food. It's such a vital part of every aspect of spiritual life from birth until death. And really the power of prayer itself is predicated upon the fact that the 99.95, well, they say 99.92 to 99.95%, but basically 100% of the molecules in your body are water molecules. And because they are able to act as resonators to resonate with the frequency of your prayer, because they're able to act like amplifiers to amplify the frequency of your prayer and intention. And because water, like we talked about in the very beginning, is so connected to the quantum field, it's actually in every single religion, cross-culturally, you get deeper into the mystery teachings, excuse me, and the way that they use water in all of their different ceremonies. And you can see that they use it as a mediator of prayer, as a mediator between the human and the heavenly, between the manifest and the unmanifest, between the mundane and the divine. It really is like the point of communion in between. And because we're made of this water, it resonates and amplifies our prayers so much. You know, there was a researcher in Russia named Dr. Korokov, and he was doing some research on water to show how it would respond to different stimuli. And he basically showed that while, yes, it is sensitive to everything, it picks up and reads and responds to everything, it's most sensitive to human emotion. It's most curious about what we're feeling. And so thinking a prayer is great. Thinking the word love, putting the word love on your bottle of water, sure, knock yourself out. But if you're feeling love, or you're feeling gratitude, or you're feeling focus, or you're feeling, you know, whatever that medicine is that you want to bring in, acceptance or motivation or whatever it is, when you work with your water, feeling that, the water will reflect it back to you. So if you put the word love on your bottle of water, but you're feeling frenzied or stressed, the water is going to respond more to that for sure.
Completely. Yeah. So it's this, this transference of intention, feeling, not just mere labeling, is the power of how this water responds to human emotion.
Yes and no. So epitaxy or transference mostly just refers to when you have one substance that is highly coherent, one substance that's already in its crystalline phase, whether that's crystalline phase water or an actual crystal, or in the case of some very rare kinds of glass, the glass itself can be structured in a matrix, and then that will lend more coherence to anything in its field. So if you put bulk water near or inside of structured water, because of epitaxy and transference, that structured water will lend more coherence and will uplift the bulk water into a higher state of crystallinity.
I see.
So that's more when you're talking about like physical things. But when you're talking about more of the energetic aspect of things, it operates on more of this principle of quantum coherence. So coherence is the ability of anything that is that comes together in a certain way to act as one cohesive unit. So for example, if you have a fabric, it's woven of thousands of different threads, but because they come together with a particular structure, the fabric has coherence and it's able to act all together as one unit, one piece of fabric. And that's what happens when the water molecules come together with a certain pattern. Then that entire body of water acts cohesively as one unit. And then the quantum aspect of quantum coherence means that it's able to, quantum is like anything that happens faster than the speed of light. You know, the speed of light is the fastest speed possible here in the third dimension. So when we're talking about something that happens faster than the speed of light, you're talking about something that pierces into another dimension. So on that quantum scale, that quantum phase. And so when you imprint love, intention, frequency, vibration, prayer into water, it's able to conduct that with quantum coherence. faster than the speed of light. And it's interesting because when we look at the quantum phase of water and some of the research that's coming out about it, we're seeing that it's echoing what a lot of indigenous people taught us about water, about water being this. For example, in many indigenous traditions, they say that lakes, for example, are portals to other realms. And in particular, the point where the water first emerges from the spring, from the source of the spring, they consider that to be a portal. In fact, right here in Bali, where I'm living, there's, even before Hinduism came to Bali, it was the land of Agamatirta, which is the water religion. So the oldest indigenous practice, way before Hinduism got here, was that they revered water.
Wow.
And they have some of the most elaborate and beautiful water traditions and water temples and water ceremonies. And I was talking to one of the water priests here about, just kind of the history with that and how it's changed over time. And they just have some amazing stories. He was saying, oh yeah, right here at this one that we were visiting, this little temple, it wasn't even one of the major temples. It was just, there are just little water temples everywhere at every single spring. And he was like, yeah, there was a priest who was living here 2 generations ago who they said he had a family in the other world and he would go through the spring to visit them. So he had a family here on this side, he had a family there on that side. And he would just go in and out through the springs and visit them. And then I was talking to another water priest here who was saying, because typically it's a lot of times it's passed down generationally in the lineage through their family. And he was like, yeah, my grandfather was able to walk on water. And everyone in the village had seen it, and it was just kind of normal. It was just kind of par for the course. And he didn't use the term par for the course. Obviously, we were in translation of Bahasa, but so yeah, there's some incredible, miraculous capabilities of water. I mean, you look at all of the major religions. Like you could write whole books just on the role of water in Christianity alone. I mean, look at the very first lines of Genesis. The very first thing they thought most important to say before anything else was, in the beginning, there was nothing. And then God moved over the face of the waters, and God said, be a firmament in the midst of the waters and let it divide the waters above from the waters below. So in the very first sentence, you say the word water like 20 times.
Yeah.
And that in the beginning, there was nothing except God and water. And God and water are so intimately connected. And the process of creation is such a process of water that in every origin story that you look at, like I've studied so many origin stories, I have yet to find a single one that doesn't involve water. Even if they use the names of different gods as the creator gods, you look and you see that in this pantheon, that's the god of water, like every single time,
Amazing.
So this role of water in creation is really fascinating, especially considering that creation isn't something that just happened once a long time ago. Creation is a continuous process of emerging. And when we ally with water, we're also allying with that process of creation and emergence and divinity.
Yes, completely. I, having this conversation and being the nerd I am of wanting to understand the science, I can sometimes hear some of my indigenous brothers and sisters telling me, no need to complicate all of this. Simply drink water from the planet and bless it and pray over it and appreciate it for what it is. And that for me has given me a foundation of implementing some ceremonial practices into my daily life in which I simply extend gratitude to my water. And after, of course, making sure that I'm drinking the highest quality water I can find. And I would love to hear if you have any practices you conduct in yourself, even if it's nothing elaborate, but what your process of giving thanks to water looks like. And if you have any recommendations for people who may be listening of how they can enact a mini ceremony. It could be 1 minute or 5 minutes of transferring this deep human emotion of gratitude to water.
I love that you're asking this. I'm actually in collaboration with a woman right now. We're coming up with she's with a ceremony that people can use But of course, anything and everything works. Like the most important thing is just your love and your intention and your presence and your intention to steward that relationship. And it opens up over time. The more you tend to this relationship, the more it just opens up. And eventually water will tell you exactly what she wants from you, exactly how she wants to be loved, exactly how she wants to be cared for on a daily basis. I love that you mentioned that you make sure it's the highest quality water first, because before I go into specific examples, I do want people to recognize that the ability of water to imprint the vibration of your prayer is directly proportional to the strength of its crystalline matrix. So you want to make sure that it's structured first, or you can do it as part of the structuring process. So one of my favorite things to do personally is to vortex my water, because it's one of the best ways to not only bring structure to it, but also to aerate it with different gases. And it just brings her alive. She loves to move. Water loves to move. She loves to play. In nature, she's always moving. So vortexing water is a really great way. And a researcher named Theodore Schwenk showed that movement opens water even more so as a sensory organ. In other words, she's most sensitive when she's moving. So when you do your prayers, it can be a good idea to either be vortexing or stirring while you're doing the prayers. Personally, I collect water songs from different cultures around the world. So I love to sing these different songs to my water. But, you don't have to be a singer. You don't have to have a particular song. It can even just be something simple like, just humming to your water, just creating this vibrational connection to your water, whatever comes to you in the moment. Maybe some lyrics will come to you in the moment. Maybe it's just something as simple as thank you, just water, thank you. But just take that time to really be present with it. And it's the presence and the communion that really goes a long way. And I absolutely, I think the most important communion that we can have and the most important ritual that we can undertake is going to our local springs. So of course, sing and love and pray and dance with your drinking water every day, but at least once a month, maybe on the full moons when the springs flow the fastest. Really, even if it takes an hour or two to drive there, who doesn't drive an hour or two to go to the airport? We're talking about a pilgrimage to the source of life. And it is absolutely worth it to go there and to have a little ceremony and to watch the body of life being born from the earth and to give offerings. This is another one of the most common aspects of ceremony in indigenous traditions. The Kogi of Colombia, who really steward water just so beautifully in probably the most beautiful ways that I've seen being shared. They call it pagamento. It's literally the rent that we pay to water for getting to steward this body of water. We get to carry around a drop of water for one lifetime in between it being a part of the watershed. As soon as we are put back in the earth, this water goes right back into the watershed again. And so we want to connect with our watershed and give payments, give pagamento, give offerings. And this can be anything. I do recommend that if it is something physical, that it be something very natural.
Yes.
Give a feather, give a crystal. Don't give like something plastic. Obviously, I feel like I don't need to tell people that, but maybe it's important because actually in Peru, so they also give offerings there. They give offerings everywhere. There they call it gazpacho, and when you give a gazpacho, you actually make this beautiful. You kind of lay it out on a fabric. And it's considered that fabric is the universe. It's a representation, a holographic representation of the universe. And so as you're laying down, beans or sugar or cacao beans or sand or whatever it is you're making, you're drawing this beautiful mandala. And then you might fold that up, and as you lay down each thing, you're giving a prayer for it as well. And as you take that to the water, you might let it go into a stream or let it go into the ocean. But because that's such a part of the culture there, you can buy gazpachos pre-made at these little shaman shops there.
Yeah.
And they have like plastic glitter and crap in them. So it's
I've seen them firsthand myself. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know that Mama Water really wants that, but yeah, that's some ideas for people to start to work with.
Beautiful. Yeah. Just a little quick side note: the Kogi people have an incredible movie online for free you can watch called Aluna. I know you have seen it. It has been one of my favorite movies over the years, and you could see this beautiful, genuine relationship these people have with the water and their understanding that water is the essence of all life and the foundation of our existence. So that movie is amazing. I would love to forward people to that. I'm going to have so many links underneath this podcast for people to check out. And just to wrap up, there has been so much great wisdom shared here. And I just want to personally thank you, Isabel, for doing everything you're doing and for truly dedicating your life to this subject, because I truly don't think there's anything else that's more important. And it is an inspiration and an honor to see and to speak with somebody who is not focusing on anything else more than this very important topic. So thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you so much. I received that. Thank you for those kind words. And thank you so much for inviting me on here and bringing this out into the world, and for your relationship with water. I can see the ways that you've really stewarded to that connection, and you've really cultivated those ceremonies, and you've really humbled yourself to the practices and the indigenous ways, and you've gone and studied and really woven this red road into your very bloodstream, and it really resonates in your energy and your presence, and I really honor you, brother. Thank you so much for who you are and for your medicine and for bringing this medicine forward.
Thank you so much, sister. To end, I would like to quote one of my brothers from South America who told me something his partner said to him, and that was, they were speaking about if all of the ceremonial work that they do is making a difference. And what she said to him was, and I'm paraphrasing, but what she said to him was, all these years, these 20 years of doing ceremony, if we haven't done anything but impact one person to change their relationship to water, that would be enough.
Yes.
Just to change one person's mind or to cultivate one person's relationship to water in a good way would make all of this work worth it. And I feel the same with this podcast. Even if it's just one person who we impact, I am grateful for that. So thank you, sister, so much.
Thank you.
So one last thing, Isabel, please let everybody know where we can find you online, where we could receive your teachings, and speak about this upcoming course you have being released this week, actually, at the point of this recording.
Yeah, I would love to share. Thank you. I have a website as waterislife.love. And I invite people to sign up for the newsletter. I respect your inbox. I don't inundate you. I actually mail things kind of rarely, but you'll get some good quality info through there. I also have a Telegram channel, which is at Life is Water. And you can find me on Instagram at Isabel Friend. And you mentioned the Navigating the Waters e-course, which is all about drinking water. And I have a 20% off coupon for your listeners. If they want to hop on there, they just use the code Masters of Ceremony.
Beautiful.
And I get 20% off Navigating the Waters. And then, yeah, like you mentioned, tomorrow, actually, we're recording this on the 27th, and tomorrow is the full moon. So the full moon, I'm so excited about this. I've been working on this for months. I'm releasing an e-course called Internal Oceans, which is all about our inner hydrology and our inner hydrological cycles and how they directly mirror the hydrology of the earth. And it goes deep, deep, deep into the science of wellness and health, and really some of the cutting edge medical discoveries about our internal waters. And originally I designed it for nutritionists and health coaches and medical practitioners of all kinds, but really it's for everyone. If you have a body of water and you want to really optimize it, then this is for you, and it's dropping tomorrow. So I invite you to come check that out. Actually, by the time this releases, it probably will already be published.
Yes, most
You
definitely.
can find that at waterislife.teachable.com.
Wow. Thank you so much, Isabel. And I'm going to put all of these links in the description of this podcast. And thank you for all that you do. And I hope that we can do a podcast like this again sometime soon, because I feel like we have only scratched the surface on this amazing topic. So I hope we can get that done sometime.
I would love that.
Beautiful.
That'd be awesome. Yeah, so much more to chat about.
Thank you so much. Have a blessed day and speak to you soon.
Thank you all so much for listening to today's episode with Isabel Friend. I'm feeling so nourished and so motivated to continue to share some of the teachings that we discussed in today's episode, because as you now heard, this is such an important topic. So I would really like to encourage you all to follow Isabel on all of her social medias and check out her website and her shop. And most importantly, take advantage of the offer that she provided here on this podcast, that you can receive 20% off any of her amazing courses. You can find those at waterislife.teachable.com. And I'm not only promoting these courses because she's told me they're great. I know, for example, how powerful they are, as stated in the podcast. I've never taken so many notes listening to YouTube lectures or any other e-course I've taken. So they're phenomenal, and I want to push everyone towards those resources. And truly, thank you all for listening to this podcast and supporting by liking it, by sharing it, by leaving a review. All of these things really do make such a difference in getting this content out there. So again, thank you all. Have a beautiful week, and see you next week.